Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info. Laurie Sansom was Artistic Director at the National Theatre of Scotland for 3 years, and before that was at Royal and Derngate in Northampton, but he's more recently stepped into the shoes of Barry Rutter and Conrad Nelson at Northern Broadsides in Halifax. His first production as director for the Broadsides is a revival of Quality Street by J M Barrie, the title of which has a special connection with the company's hometown. But I asked him first of all to explain the story of this rarely performed play.
Quality Street is a play written by J M Barrie that was published in 1901, and it's about two sisters who live in I think it's described as a quaint provincial town. So we're setting it in Regency, Halifax. So it's the date of the plays, the date of the action is 1805 through to 1815. So it ends with Waterloo, and it's almost like a Regency rom-com, but with a bit of a subversive twist, because it's about how Phoebe, one of the sisters, thinks that a dashing gentleman of the town is coming around to propose to her, and actually comes around and tells her that he's going off to fight Napoleon. And then you cut to 10 years later. And 10 years later, he returns, but he finds that the two sisters are now living in penury, running a very grim school with lots of unruly children they can't control. And he walks in and looks crushed and disappointed when he looks at his old flame, who's now 10 years older. And that sparks the rest of the action, because Phoebe is absolutely livid that he looks at her in this way and seems disappointed in that she's now a hard-working woman who no longer is glamorous. And so she finds herself in this rather farcical situation where she comes downstairs dressed in one of her old ball gowns with her hair all done and her makeup, as if to say, right, is this what men want? Is this what they want? And he walks back in and he thinks that it's someone new, and she finds herself pretending to be her own niece. So it's this kind of... So at the heart of it is quite a subversive situation, because Phoebe kind of entraps him for his kind of, for what she thinks is the fact that he's not interested in an older, more mature woman who no longer has all the frills of being a young lady in this quaint town. So, and it works itself out through a series of farcical incidents. And the reason we're doing it is because it's actually what the chocolates were named after. Yeah. The play actually gave its name to the sweets. And the sweets have been made here in Halifax since 1936. So we thought, well, that's a little bit of local cultural history that we should explore.
Yeah, so it's even though he's Scottish, it's actually a local story for you. But it sounds like it's not exactly Peer Gynt, where the wife waits for years and years and then just waits patiently for him. She sounds more like a more modern character, how we would see it as a modern female character. Is that right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's what's so surprising about it. I mean, I think actually when you find out a little bit more about Barrie, then you realise that actually he always wrote these fantastic parts for these wonderful independent women, and actually the play kind of dramatises how, of course it's set in Regency England, but equally it could be the end of Victorian England as well, about the boxes that social codes put on women's behaviour, and she becomes a young woman who doesn't follow any of the bounds of strict moral codes of behaviour between the sexes. And so, yeah, it does feel really contemporary. And the more we work on it, actually, and it's partly because we've got this fantastic young actress called Jessica Baglow playing Phoebe, the more contemporary it feels, which is great, because you don't know until you're in the room doing the work, exploring it. And actually, the more we work on it, the more surprised we are by it, actually.
Yeah, I've seen Jessica in a few plays at Bolton in particular.
Oh, yeah.
And I can picture in that sort of role. Yeah.
Brilliant. And she's also playing opposite Claire Hackett, who she was at Bolton with in a couple of shows, Jane Eyre, for one. And Claire plays Patty, who's the wise housekeeper who sees through all the ridiculous social mores of the time and says it as it is. So they're a brilliant foil for each other, actually, and they know each other really well. So that's been lovely.
Yeah. It's funny, though, then, that Barrie is known, obviously, for Peter Pan, but he's not known... He wrote a lot of plays at the time.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't think he was greatly successful as a playwright at the time, but they're certainly very rarely revived now, are they?
Well, actually, he was the first millionaire playwright. He was a celebrity playwright. He was a massive success before Peter Pan. Yeah. So Admiral Crichton, The Quality Street was a massive hit, and both in the West End and Broadway where it opened, and it made stars of the two young actresses, the American actress and the British actress who first played the part, because the part is just a gift, really. So it's amazing to realise that his reputation has been so eclipsed by the mythical success of Peter Pan that actually I think that's been a stone round the neck of his reputation in some ways, and of course it's what's made him so well known, because the rest of the canon isn't done that often.
So what made you discover this? How did you find it?
Well, it was actually a conversation with Jason MacDonald when I was up in Scotland at the NTF. We were talking about Barrie. He was keen to do a Barrie play. And I'd moved on by the time we got the chance to actually work together on something. But it kind of flipped a switch in my head when I was looking at what to do first for Broadsides. I'd be talking to the artist directors of the theatres who are really central to the Broadsides tour, so Liverpool and York and Stoke and Scarborough, and some of those theatres that have such a loyal, fiercely loyal Broadsides audience. And we were talking a bit about what audiences were kind of wanting at the time. And it was clear that people were wanting the opportunity to have a really good night out and a really good laugh. So I have to say that I did put aside some of my other programming ideas and thought I need to find a popular comedy that's also got some teeth to it, because otherwise I won't be that interested in it. And also I wanted to find something that had some kind of local connection. I'm really keen that Broadsides is really rooting itself, even as a touring company, in where it originated and where we're based in Halifax. And you can't avoid it in Halifax, in that the train comes into the station and there's a great big sign of Quality Street right in front of you, because the factory is right there. So it's a really significant employer. And so I was looking at some of the playwrights I thought there might be a hidden gem, because I always think that there are plays that come in and out of fashion and drop out of awareness, not always because of anything, not because of the quality of the play, but just force of circumstance. So I did a double bill of a Eugene O'Neill play and a Tennessee Williams play about 10 years ago, and they'd never been done in Europe, and actually they're both brilliant bits of writing, but they'd just fallen out of the popular canon. So Barrie felt like one of those writers where I knew there were plays that I hadn't read. So I started looking at it, and when I saw there was a play called Quality Street, I immediately went, oh, well, I've got to read that one then. And read it, and what was interesting is I read the first act and went, oh, okay, all right, I know what kind of play this is. The play's in 4 acts. Read the second one, and suddenly there was this subversive situation, and it seemed to turn the entire play on its head. And I was like, oh, hang on a minute, this is much more interesting than I thought it was going to be. And then the research told me that the chocolates were named after the play rather than the other way around. And then I thought, oh, well, that's a done deal, isn't it? We've got to do it now. Yeah.
So did you find any other gems while you were researching Barrie, or are you keeping those to yourself? I'm
going to keep them in the back pocket right now. He's got really interesting kind of canon of works. I know Giles Croft, who I worked with at Watford as a trainee director, he did Dear Brutus and Mary Rose and some of those really interesting ghost plays that are quite a lot of themes that run through about youth and eternal youth and time shifts, and so there are some similar themes, but this is an out boulevard comedy, whilst also at the heart of it asking some questions about who we are and what we value, and how to grow old disgracefully, and what physical appearance the part physical appearance plays in our obsession with youth and beauty. So there's some really contemporary themes that it's working through.
Yeah, it's tempting to analyse the playwright through that, though, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And the other thing that I also knew we could do is involve some people who worked for and still works for the Quality Street factory.
Yeah.
So we, as part of the process, we have initiated putting together a creation squad to make every show, so that we're always making a production in collaboration with local people. So for Quality Street, we're going to be showing parts of the play to people who work at the factory to get their commentary on it, and also get their stories about working in the factory, love on the factory floor, growing old disgracefully, and actually work a contemporary commentary around the action of the play. And we're also going to be doing free performances for the workers, friends and families of people who work at the factory. So there was a way of really sharing part of a local story and have people working with us on making sure that the play is relevant, and also that they can actually alter how we make it and be part of the actual production.
Yeah. The last couple of big organisations you've worked for, Royal and Derngate and National Theatre of Scotland, these are large organisations. So what appealed to you about taking over at Northern Broadsides? Yeah,
well, you may have just pointed out the very thing that makes it really attractive, and that's that there's 3.5 of us who work at Northern Broadsides, and it's a small team who are really dedicated and committed to what we make. It's got a great, fiercely loyal audience, and also there was it was at a point where the company needed to shift and change. I was kind of used to that founder syndrome from NTS, actually, because I took over straight after Vicky Featherstone had done such a brilliant job of setting it up in a really iconoclastic way, really. Yeah. And that was not easy. I mean, there's real challenges when you're the second person to run an organisation. Broadside had already gone through a transition, so once Barrie had left, Conrad Nelson had been interim for a couple of years, and obviously he had been associated with the company for such a long time, but had decided not to apply for the role, and it felt like Broadsides had already gone through its inward-looking soul-searching about what it wanted to be and what it wanted to become, and actually it was a really good opportunity to come in and work with the team and locally with other cultural organisations to investigate what Broadsides could evolve into. And actually, when it's a small team like that, it really is a small family pitching in to make the work. And what I didn't want is to run a big organisation at the moment. Right. It's whether you've got more than one of them in you. Some people have. I mean, I don't know whether I have, but certainly at this point in time, it's a really sympathetic home for me as a director, and I think I can bring something to the organisation as we kind of evolve its offer, actually, and particularly its community engagement offer. So we're developing a new strategy of how we work with local people, which is not something that the company's done before. Right. And actually it's quite a challenge for a touring company, but I think it's actually a really exciting opportunity at the moment. Halifax is going through a bit of a cultural renaissance, and being part of that was also really attractive. So there were so many reasons why coming back to Yorkshire was a really exciting proposition for me, because of course I'd cut my teeth in Scarborough working for Alan Aitborn.
When the company was started by Barrie Rutter, it had a very particular, and all the time he was running it, it had this very particular philosophy of touring classical theatre with large casts and northern voices. Yeah. I assume you're still maintaining that, but how is that evolving as you go forward?
Yeah. So, we're still committed to doing classical work in Northern Voice. What I'm keen to do is expand what our remit is, and also really explore what the Northern Voice means now, because I think when Barrie set it up, there was definitely a radical agenda which really changed and shifted people's perception of how classic plays could and should be performed. Arguably, that battle has been largely won. Certainly, you don't see Shakespeare done in precious cut glass, crystal English accents anymore. Not all the time, anyway. But it feels like what we can do is reflect on what the Northern Voice as a bigger idea means now. And actually, there's not one Northern Voice. There's a multiplicity of Northern Voices if we're starting to think about what the region is feeling and looking like. So what we're keen to do is explore contemporary versions of classics and new plays, but also engage with the local community and see what role we can play culturally. So we made a small-scale piece at Christmas, which was in conjunction with a centre that supports asylum seekers here in Halifax, and worked with 2 Iranian classical singers who just arrived in Halifax with Yorkshire folk singers, and we made a piece that told the story of those 2 Iranian artists who'd fled for their lives and arrived in Britain just recently, and put them in equivalence with some Yorkshire folk stories, and that was a kind of statement of intent, really, for us, of expanding who we work with and who we make work for, because on that occasion we could then share that work and do free performances for the people who were using that centre and needing support, some of the most vulnerable people here in Halifax, and also play to our regular loyal Broadsides audience. So that felt like it was a bit of a game changer for us of who we work with and the audiences we play to.
Yeah, but a natural evolution from what the company was doing before.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
You're right that you do hear a lot more regional accents on stage, even at the RSC now in classical work.
Yeah.
But, there has been a problem identified of class in theatre creators. I mean, even I've noticed on the Edinburgh Fringe, even the front of house crew, not many of them have regional accents anymore. Because you've got to have a certain amount of income to be able to afford to do certain jobs,
absolutely.
Or some parental support. So is that an issue? Because you do. Barrie had a working class ethic as well, didn't he? Is that an issue that you're confronting?
I think it's really important. I mean, I'm a working class Kent boy. I don't know whether I lost my working class credentials once I went to Cambridge. It's a really complicated thing, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's not simple. It's not straightforward. But certainly, I think we create elites in all kinds of ways. Class is definitely one of them, and I think we create elites in the arts as well. And that often means about who we are excluding and who we're excluding, either through the signals or the way we make work or where we put it. So one of the things that we're looking at is we don't really have control over the how theatres on our touring network do their audience development, who they play to, even though a lot of those organisations are equally having to look at this really carefully and put steps in place. But we can control how we make work and who we share it with before it goes out. And also, in terms of who we work with, we're also looking at making sure we always advertise at least one of the creative roles openly, so that we don't ever become a club. Because I think the thing that I've always found uncomfortable, and it still happens a lot, I think, is that artistic organisations and artists can become clubbable really quickly. Yeah. And that means you get your small group of people who are in the club, and there's a whole group of people who are never allowed in. And for me, it's always been trying to break down those barriers and make it more porous. Class is a big one, but class of audience as well is massive. I believe there are plenty of people who are funding the arts and arts companies just through paying taxes, who are not accessing it and paying 20 quid for a theatre ticket and never will, either because they can't afford it or it just is not one of their priorities. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be making that work for them and making it accessible. So for me, that's about making it free as much as possible, as well as initiatives like Pay What You Decide. So I think there's a whole raft of things that need to shift and change if we're going to make sure that theatre doesn't become just the playground of the middle classes, people with enough disposable income, or people who are included in the elite. And Scotland was really great for me for that, because actually I think theatre has not become what it has largely in London, which is the preserve of either an educated elite or an affluent elite. It still feels like it's a popular art form.
Yes.
And that it's not quite as straightforward as that, but ticket prices are low enough and it's happening across the country enough that it's actually reaching a broader demographic of people, I think. So that's quite a challenge to set ourselves as a touring company, but one that we want to get to grips with as soon as we can.
Yeah. You were at National Theatre of Scotland for 3 years, which is plenty time to be managing a national team of any kind. But when you announced that you were leaving there, the rumour mill started flying about why you were leaving. But how do you look back on that time now?
Well, I was really proud of the work we were making, and the artistic programme I was really proud of. Certainly there was internal politics that were difficult to manage, and in the end it seemed to be clear to me that it was time for me to move on and leave it for someone else to take on. I think it's really great that it's now a Scottish woman running the company, and I think actually it ended up being a transitional period for the company, and I'm proud to have steered it through that time. We fundraised and designed a brand new building for the company, not a performance space, but a space where artists can make work and develop work. And I mean, if I had any regret, it was that I never actually got to make a piece of work in there because I had left before it opened. But I'm really proud of my time, and still have so many friends and colleagues in Scotland, and will be working with them again. So, it was a challenging time, but I'm really proud of the work we all made.
And it was a big transition from a big building-based company like Royal and Derngate.
Yeah, it was, and obviously all of the eyes are on you when you run a national company, because everybody has an opinion over what national means, what theatre means, what Scotland means, and so there's a pulling and pushing all the time, and you are being scrutinised very carefully, and there's lots of people with opinions, and that's how it should be. I think Scotland's really good about having that debate. I mean, voices are heard, and the company also was, I think, quite sensitive to what people wanted from their theatre. It's always difficult. You can't be something for everyone all the time. No. For me, what was important was making popular new writing on large stages, because I felt that was a bit of a gap for the company. And so the James plays and other work was about filling that gap. So I still kind of hold on to that, and for me that's still important, but that's about also how you're using the money, because I think if you're a well-funded organisation, you also have a responsibility to reach as many people in the country as you possibly can. Yeah. So that was some of the things that were driving me, and I think they're still really important for any national organisation.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, we're responsive, but you could drive yourself mad reading the comments under the articles in the Scotsman quite quickly, couldn't you? But
quite, absolutely.
But I mean, something like the James plays is quite a legacy to leave behind. But there were also lots of very small works that went to tiny places around Scotland as well, weren't there? Absolutely.
I mean, we were making work in the Gaelic language, and we're touring it to the Outer Hebrides, as well as making large-scale community pieces of work in Aberdeen and in Glasgow. So, I mean, I think that unique piece of writing comes along once in a generation for you, and it hit at a moment when the whole country was thinking about its own national identity. So it felt absolutely the right thing to do at the time, and then 2 years later we revived it for an international tour and a national tour. So it did strike a chord, and it explored national identity through the prism of history that had been largely forgotten even in Scotland. And it's exciting that we're starting to now talk about James IV, and because of course there's 3 more Jameses to be done, and Rona's at the height of her powers, so that's an exciting adventure to be starting on again.
But your adventure is just starting really at Broadsides. Again, you're touring smaller scale than some of the big stuff that we've just been talking about. So where do you go from here? Have you got? Do you know? You said you put a few other ideas aside to do Quality Street. So is there anything that you can talk about that's coming up?
Well, we're soon going to be able to announce a really exciting co-production with Leeds Playhouse for next year. And that's, I'm excited about that. We're going to do 2 co-pros with Leeds next year. And that'll be great, because it really it allows us to do 2 large-scale pieces of work and get them out touring. And that announcement will be soon.
Right.
But a really exciting project, and one that actually was going to happen this year, and for a whole combination of reasons is going to suit better next year. And it'll be a female director, and believe it or not, that is the first female director Broadsides has ever had, which is slightly shocking. But actually just a result of the heritage of how the company was developed and the fact that Barrie and Conrad were the two artistic directors. So for me, it's really important that the company is developing northern talent across the board. So I'm really looking forward to that piece and being able to talk about it.
That was Laurie Sansom, Artistic Director of Northern Broadsides, talking about his production of Quality Street by J M Barrie, which opens at the Viaduct Theatre in Halifax from the 14th to the 22nd of February 2020, before touring to the Lowry in Salford, the Dukes in Lancaster, Theatre Royal Bury St Edmunds, Liverpool Playhouse, Northern Stage in Newcastle-upon-Tyne, Yvonne Arnaud Theatre in Guildford, Derby Theatre, Leeds Playhouse, New Vic Theatre in Newcastle-under-Lyme, Stephen Joseph Theatre in Scarborough, Harrogate Theatre, Hull Truck Theatre and York Theatre Royal, where it closes in June. For more information, see www.northern-broadsides.co.uk or contact any of the theatres on the tour. You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.